Welcome back. I'm your host, Renata McElveny, a creativity coach for neurodivergent and multi-passionate women of color. And in this show, we talk about all things creativity as it relates to our self-discovery and healing journey. Let's get started. All right, so before we dive in, all the way in, can I take you back to a time when I really thought that I was going to be that girl? You know, the one that has the dream job, the clean house, the 5 a.m. workout routine, the homemade meals, a thriving social life, and glowing skin. Yeah, let's talk about that era for a second because it was a whole ass mess and I didn't even know it yet. I was single handedly focused on achieving success in the traditional and mainstream acceptable way. I was obsessed with living every aspect of my life perfectly. And this is what it looked like. At work, it meant working for a prestigious company, striving to be an excellent worker, and being perceived as doing interesting work. In my personal life, it meant keeping the house clean. It meant cooking meals from scratch because what kind of a healthy person doesn't cook from scratch? Waking up at 5 a.m., having lots of friends that I could count on, and having perfectly healthy relationships. In my goals, it meant aspiring to owning a big house with a white picket fence, having two cars, two kids, and making good money, of course. God, just naming all of that sounds super exhausting now. I was completely naive to the realities of adult life and the truth of what life was going to become for me as a woman of color, a millennial, and an immigrant living in the US of A. I hadn't fully realized just how much of my dreams, my aspirations, and my daily tasks were dictated by external pressures, outdated ideas of the so called American dream, and the impact of coming to terms with a late diagnosis of my neurodivergence. In retrospect, this was completely unrealistic, a fantasy of an adult life, but it has only become obvious in hindsight. And it's easy to judge ourselves for not knowing better. But this is precisely why I want to talk about this today. How do we stop blaming ourselves? And how do we stop internalizing perceived failures for not being able to achieve, do, and manage it all? Especially when external pressures tell us that we should be doing otherwise. External expectations that have gone unquestioned about what and how much you are supposed to be able to do on the daily basis, especially as ambitious and multi-passionate women of color who are likely already juggling a bunch of different things. Even in our modern and wannabe egalitarian society, as women, we still end up with the brunt of the work in most aspects of our lives. We end up having to raise children, care for family members, go into a day job, managing a household, running a business or growing, trying to start to grow a business. And yet, we still tend to hold ourselves to really high standards, perfectionism, and we struggle with our self worth when we can't seem to be superwoman or the perfect woman to the world, the one who can do it all, and not just do it all, but do it flawlessly. This is why in today's show, I want us to unpack some of these external expectations and challenge the assumption that we are supposed to be able to do it all. Where this is all coming from and how you might be internalizing systemic failures. Why, as neurodivergent and multi passionate women of color, we are more prone to struggling with these external pressures and how to take back our humanity, take back our time and energy so that we can experience more ease, more calm, and joy. If this sounds interesting to you, then keep listening, keep watching if you're on YouTube, and let's get into it. Let's start by talking about our society's obsession with being busy and productive. If you look around, everyone is proud of always being busy. Being busy is a sign of fitting in and being accepted. If you're not busy, are you even alive? I'm kidding, but in all seriousness, if you are not working, you are seen as not cool, not interesting in our modern society. We don't even know what to talk about when it isn't about work. From personal experience, I think about like my time when I was in college, when then I transitioned into working a full-time job and I was applauded for it and I was seen as a winner, and realizing how living in a city like LA or Long Beach, where there is a very buzzing creative energy with other ambitious creatives, really impacted the way that I was brought up, the way that I was raised, and has influenced and made me look at life in a particular way. I felt so much pressure without even realizing it. We are also so focused on doing, achieving, growing, optimizing that we are forgetting that we are also human beings who also need to unplug, recharge, and just exist, even if we like what we do for a living. We keep saying yes to work out of guilt, not wanting to appear lazy or unmotivated, or simply being afraid of what to do with ourselves when we aren't being distracted by external demands. We don't know what rest means anymore, especially if you're like me, someone who is a first generation immigrant, who was raised to pursue the American dream, who was told that hard work meant that I was successful in the eyes of society, who is multi passionate, who is highly curious, and of course, very ambitious. But what if this whole time we have been assuming that our perceived failures are our fault? What if instead I told you that a lot of the issues that we are currently facing are actually systemic? If you think about it, this makes a lot of sense in a country that is obsessed with toxic individualism, pulling yourself by the bootstraps, and gaslighting us into thinking that we don't have any value unless we are producing things. Then at the fact that a lot of us are introverts who are natural internalizers, and by default our tendency is to go inwards, to overthink and blame ourselves when things don't go as planned. It's easy then to see how quickly things can spiral out of control and our mental health and self-worth suffers. We have been programmed to blame ourselves instead of looking at the overarching system, a system that, by the way, was never meant to include people like you and me, a system that by default was built to keep us out of it. This is why it's so critical that we start to gain perspective and look outside of ourselves to understand what we are actually dealing with, because a lot of these problems existed long before we got here. And I do think there is a fine line between taking responsibility for what we do and striving to be better. But this is very different from what this country and the very people that should take more responsibility and be held accountable for their countless heinous actions are doing and saying when they're running around causing mayhem and terrorizing the rest of us. So we really need to stop letting this sick society gaslight us into thinking that this is our fault and only our fault. Now, let's talk about an experience that is becoming more and more common, and that is realizing that you are neurodivergent, whether autistic, ADHD, or a combination of any of these. And by the way, there's other diagnoses that I'm not mentioning that are also part of the neurodivergent umbrella. And I just want to say that because that's I focus on talking about autism and ADHD because that's my experience, but there's a lot more out there, and I just wanted to name that. But yeah, this is something that a lot of us are coming to terms with, and we either have one diagnosis or a combination of them, and we're coming to learn about this in late adulthood. And so you might just be starting to realize that your energy levels are inconsistent and that this makes you feel even more inadequate and frustrated than ever because the cracks are starting to show. Maybe you used to be able to do a lot more in your youth when you went to school, and due to the structure, it was easier to keep up with things. But now things are different and there's nowhere to run. You may also be struggling with executive function issues like planning, organizing, and managing your to dos, just to name a few. And if you're like me, you might also be struggling with a chronic illness like PCOS, chronic pain, diabetes, the list goes on and on and on. It's no surprise then that we are exhausted. Any combination of these diagnoses will absolutely make it extremely challenging to have any energy left to do anything else. And I just want us to notice that the focus seems to always be to do more. But the truth is that we are already doing more. We are already doing a lot. Another super frustrating part about having unpredictable energy levels, especially if you are an ADHDer like me, and that we hear very little to nothing about online, is that we are having to work with sudden bursts of creative energy that arise in the most inconvenient and unpredictable times during our day. So, for example, you might be trying to go to sleep and you're laying on bed and things are coming to mind, or you're trying to take a shower, trying to relax, and suddenly you have all these creative ideas. And it's so frustrating to never know when that's going to happen. It seems like it's a fine balance between staying interested and engaged and getting overwhelmed and burnt out. And this is by no means an easy balance to strike. I think that we can all agree that there is already so much that we are dealing with, and I want us to give ourselves credit for that. Lastly, let's not forget the struggle of being multi-passionate and interesting in many different things. If you're someone who is naturally curious and likes to do a lot of different things, then it's no surprise to realize that our very nature is also something that we have to contend with, because oftentimes we are spending 80% of our time managing our lives and only leaving about 20%, if not less, to things that actually bring us joy. It's frustrating to feel like we have to spend so much of our energy on shoulds and responsibilities, and life can quickly become about nothing but paying bills and going to a job that many of us actually don't really like. But I'm here to interrupt this and to encourage you to reflect on this in your own life. Because the truth is that we need to leave space, energy, and time to take care of ourselves. And part of taking care of ourselves is also being able to enjoy the people, things, and experiences that bring us joy. Like I often say, creativity, art, and self-expression are not nice to haves. They are a necessity in this capitalistic hellscape. These things that might look frivolous from the outside are the very things that will give us the energy to keep going, to support our mental health, to validate our experiences, and to help us to create meaning. Honestly, if you are not creating or expressing yourself, you are likely stuck in fears and overthinking. And I think that it's better for all of us to learn how to transform our worries into creative expression. To recap, today we talked about our society's obsession with productivity, the need to push back against systemic failures, recognizing the weight of a late neurodivergence diagnosis and a chronic illness, and the challenges of our multi-passionate creative nature. In closing, my hope is that after today's episode, you will realize that there is nothing wrong with you. You just live in a capitalistic society obsessed with productivity, where even rest is framed as a strategy to do more. I'm also hoping that you are learning to listen to yourself and that you become an observer of your own experience, that you honor your energy levels by practicing self-compassion and self-acceptance. These are steps that you can take that don't require you to add more to your to-do list. And finally, I hope that you remember that your creative self-care is not a nice to have, it's vital. We have come to the end of this episode, and I'm curious to know about your own experiences. What do you struggle with most when it comes to practicing self compassion or self acceptance? I would love it if you drop it in the comments below so that we can all learn from each other. And also, don't forget to subscribe and hit like if you are watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you on the next one. Until then, stay creative. Bye.